I woke up to the golden California sun filtering through the blinds, unaware that it would be one of the last peaceful mornings of my old life. My name is Michael, and at 38 years old, I thought I had it all. A loving wife, two wonderful children, and a stable office job in a suburb of Los Angeles. Each day, I commuted on the crowded freeways and returned each evening to the warm embrace of my family. Our home sat on a quiet street lined with palm trees, the ocean breeze occasionally wafting through our yard on especially clear days. I believed our life was picture perfect, the kind of comfortable family existence that we had both dreamed of when we were young. My wife Jessica was the center of that life. At 36, she balanced her career in a tech company with the demands of motherhood gracefully, or so I thought. We had been married for 15 years, and in that time we had grown from college sweethearts to partners raising a family together. Jessica was outgoing and ambitious, with a radiant smile that could light up a room. I was proud of her successes at work and cherished the warmth she brought to our home. We have two children, Ethan, our 14-year-old son who just started high school, and Olivia, our 10-year-old daughter who could always make us laugh with her dramatic storytelling. On weekends, we were the typical family strolling through the local farmers market, cheering at soccer games or enjoying movie nights snuggled on the couch. Those early days of our marriage and family life were filled with laughter, plans for the future, and intimate moments after the kids went to bed. Jessica and I shared everything, or so I believed. I never imagined there was a secret wedge driving between us. Looking back, I can pinpoint little moments that seem obvious now. The distracted look in her eyes when I talked about my day, the way she started staying late at work more often over the past few months, or how she guarded her phone with a new intensity. At the time, I brushed these things off. After all, I trusted her completely. We were happy, weren't we? I had no reason to suspect that behind her beautiful smile, something in our marriage was shifting in a way I couldn't see. I remember one evening distinctly, just a couple of weeks before my world began to crumble. We were having dinner at the kitchen table, homemade tacos that Jess had whipped up while dancing to old 90s music. Olivia was giggling at her mom's goofy dance moves, and Ethan was trying to act like the cool teenager but couldn't help cracking a smile. I was watching Jessica twirl with a dish towel in hand, her laughter filling our home. My heart swelled with gratitude in that moment. I thought to myself, this is it. This is everything I ever wanted. The joy in our house felt real and earned, built up over years of trust, love, and mutual respect. If there were any storm clouds on our horizon, I was blissfully blind to them. That night, after the kids were in bed, Jessica and I sat on the patio under the soft glow of string lights. We talked about trivial things, the upcoming school fundraiser, a new project at her job, the idea of maybe taking a family trip to Disneyland that summer. She leaned on my shoulder, and I remember kissing the top of her head, feeling utterly content. She was affectionate and engaging, nothing amiss that I could tell. If there was turmoil brewing within her, she hid it expertly. In hindsight, I wonder if she was silently grappling with guilt even then, or if she had compartmentalized her life so well that our time together still felt genuine to her. It's a question that haunts me. Were those moments of happiness on her part real or just an illusion maintained for the sake of normalcy? In the calm before the storm, I was a man who considered himself incredibly lucky. I had a career moving steadily forward in a family that was the envy of my friends. Some weekends, my best friend Dave and his wife would come over for a barbecue, and we often talked about how we'd all grow old together and watch our kids go off to college. Life wasn't perfect, no life is, but the problems we had seemed mundane and manageable. A disagreement with Jessica over bills here, a tough week at work there. Nothing out of the ordinary for a long-term marriage. There were no screaming fights, no cold wars, just a comfortable routine, layered with the small, warm moments that make a life. If there were signs of discontent in Jessica, I missed them entirely. She'd been texting more often, but I thought it was just work or her sister she chatted with regularly. Sometimes she was a bit distant after coming home late from the office, but I assumed she was just tired. I would tease her saying, "Don't let that startup work you to death." And she'd smile and squeeze my hand, assuring me it was just a busy period before a product launch. I didn't know that those extra hours at work had a name and a face. I didn't know that my trust was slowly being betrayed every time she said, "I'll be home a bit late, don't wait up." In those final peaceful days, I still fell asleep beside my wife thinking I was the luckiest man alive. I couldn't fathom that the life we built was already starting to crack, under the weight of a lie I had yet to discover. The storm was gathering in the distance, but all I saw then were clear skies. Uncovering the betrayal. It happened on an evening like any other, under a sunset streaked with oranges and purples. I had come home from work a bit early that day, hoping to surprise the family by picking up takeout from our favorite Chinese restaurant. The house was quiet when I arrived. Ethan was at a late basketball practice and Olivia was at a friend's for a sleepover. I walked into the kitchen with the plastic bags of food, expecting to see Jessica working at her laptop or relaxing in front of the TV. Instead, I found a note on the counter. Working late again. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you. Her neat handwriting with a small heart next to her words would have once made me smile. But in that moment, seeing that note brought a slight furrow to my brow. Lately, these notes were appearing more often than I liked. Something felt off, a prickle of unease that I couldn't quite place. Jessica had indeed been logging long hours for the past few months, claiming that the project at her tech company was reaching a critical phase. I had always taken her at her word. But standing alone in our kitchen, the aroma of sweet and sour chicken in the air, I felt a sudden urge to verify her story for the first time. It wasn't a rational impulse, call it a gut feeling or the first crack of doubt. Normally, I would have texted her a silly photo of me digging into the takeout as a joke about not waiting. Instead, I found myself dialing her number. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Odd? She normally at least texted back quickly, even if she was busy. I tried to shake off the worry. Maybe she was in a meeting or driving. To distract myself, I set the table for 2 in case she came home hungry later, then flicked on the TV. Some rerun of a sitcom played in the background, but I wasn't paying attention. After a while, I realized I was just staring at my phone, waiting for a response that wasn't coming. That's when I noticed that her tablet was sitting on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a notification as I glanced over. A text message preview. It was just a few words, but it made my heart pound in my chest. The message read, "Can't wait to see you again." And it was from a name I didn't immediately recognize. Ryan L. The preview faded after a second and the tablet screen went dark again. I stood there frozen, the hairs on my arms standing on end. In an instant, 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. Who is Ryan L? Why is someone I don't know sending my wife such a message? My mouth went dry. I tried to tell myself there had to be a benign explanation. Maybe a coworker texting about a meeting? But what kind of coworker texted that he couldn't wait to see her again? I picked up the tablet with trembling hands. My mind was racing, heart thudding as if I had sprinted up a hill. The device was unlocked. Jessica must have left it logged in, not expecting me to be home so early. With a deep breath and a knot twisting in my gut, I opened her messaging app. My vision blurred for a moment, and I realized tears had formed in my eyes out of some instinctual dread. I blinked them away and forced myself to read. There it was. An entire string of messages between my wife and someone named Ryan. As I scrolled up, the conversation unfolded like a nightmare screenplay. Some messages were mundane, discussions about work or jokes about their coworkers. But interspersed were lines that made my stomach churn. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. I love the way I feel when I'm with you. Heart emojis. Hidden inside those banal exchanges was an intimacy that should not have been there. The further I read, the more explicit they became. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the tablet when I saw a photo that made me gasp. A selfie of Jessica in our bedroom mirror, wearing the new lingerie set I had bought her for her birthday, the one I had yet to actually see her wear. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. My knees felt weak and I sank onto the couch as my world started to tilt. Line after line, the evidence of her betrayal was laid bare in front of me. She was talking about meeting up the next day at lunch, referencing a hotel by name, the Pacific Palms. I recognized it. It was a small hotel not far from her office, the kind people use for short daytime stays when they don't want to be seen. They had apparently met there before. The words blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. I could barely breathe. My mind tried to reject what I was seeing. This couldn't be my wife, my Jessica, writing these things. This was a woman I didn't know, flirting and planning rendezvous, risking everything we had for what? My hands had turned cold as ice. I realized I was gripping the tablet so hard my knuckles were white. I forced myself to loosen my hold, fearing I might crack the screen in anger. Anger. Yes, beyond the shock and the hurt that was welling up like a dark tide, a spark of anger flickered to life. How could she do this? Why would she do this? A growl of pain escaped my throat before I could stop it, and I half expected Jessica to walk in at that very moment and ask what was wrong. But she wasn't there. She was with him. I paced the living room, one hand running through my hair as I tried to think. Part of me wanted to call her right then and demand an explanation, to confront her with the vile evidence I was still staring at. But another part, the rational part perhaps, held me back. The shock was giving way to a clarity of thought I didn't know I was capable of in that moment. I realized that if I tipped her off now, she would just deny everything or spin some story. If I confronted her without proof in hand, she might delete everything, and I'd be left questioning myself. Right now, in my trembling fingers, I held the truth, and I knew instinctively that I needed to preserve it. My heart hammered as I took photos of the tablet's screen with my own phone, evidence of the messages, the photos, all of it. My hands were unsteady, and I had to retry a few shots as tears of rage and hurt blurred my vision. I made myself read every incriminating line to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding. It was all there. They'd been seeing each other for at least 3 months. They met during or after work, sometimes at that hotel, sometimes at a park. They joked about how easy it was to fool everyone. A particular line felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Think your husband suspects anything?" Ryan had asked. "No, he's completely clueless, poor thing," Jessica responded. Poor thing. She called me poor thing while laughing with the man she was cheating on me with. The humiliation and fury that rose inside me at those words nearly made me throw the tablet across the room. Tears were freely rolling down my face now. I wasn't even sure when I'd started crying. It was a strange mix of emotions: grief for the loss of the trust and love I thought we shared, and an icy anger that began to harden into something resolute. My chest ached as if someone had squeezed my heart in a fist. I thought of Ethan and Olivia, our children, the foundation of our family that we had built for years. How could she put all that at risk? Did she think of them at all while she was off with him? The thought of my kids' faces gave me a surge of determination. This was bigger than just me and her now. This could shatter our family, and I needed to protect them from the fallout as best I could. After collecting myself just enough to move, I did something that felt eerily calm for how chaotic I felt inside. I forwarded the entire chain of incriminating messages and photos from her tablet to my email. It was easy. Her tablet was synced to the cloud, and by some miracle, she hadn't enabled any additional security. As I typed in my email address and hit send on the evidence, my hand steadied. A new sensation was washing over me, a sense of cold, clear purpose. Yes, I was devastated, but beneath that devastation, rage was building, solidifying into resolve. If she was going to blow up our world, I wasn't going to let her do it on her terms. I would do this smart. I would do this right. As I set the tablet down, a thought occurred to me that made my blood run cold. If they were planning to meet at the Pacific Palms Hotel tomorrow at lunch, that meant she was likely still going to come home tonight as if nothing were wrong. She'd walk in, maybe late, give me a kiss on the cheek with the same lips that had kissed him, and act like she was just tired from work. The sheer duplicity of that thought was like acid in my veins. Part of me wanted to pack her things and throw them on the lawn right then and there, but I knew I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not yet. I cleaned up the untouched takeout and stored it in the fridge, my appetite completely gone. Then I sat in the dark living room, phone in hand, staring blankly at the muted television. My mind was a storm of images and possibilities. Every minute felt like an hour as I waited for her to come home. I half hoped she wouldn't come back at all that night, but around 10 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My heart lurched. I hastily wiped my face, hoping my eyes weren't too red. I didn't want to give anything away, not until I figured out what to do. I braced myself, trying to swallow the bitterness that threatened to spill out of me. The front door opened, and there she was. Jessica, dressed in her work blouse and slacks, looking a little tired. She gave me a warm, gentle smile as our eyes met. In that instant, I had never felt such a conflict of emotions. I loved her. I hated her. I wanted to scream and I wanted to cry, but I did none of those things. "Hey," she said softly, crossing the room to me. The scent of her perfume hit me. A floral scent I'd always loved, now forever tainted by the knowledge of who she'd last worn it for. She leaned in and gave me a peck on the lips, exactly as she always did when coming home late. I forced myself not to recoil. I forced a neutral, maybe even slightly warm expression, praying that the dim lighting hid the pain in my eyes. "Hey, welcome home," I managed to say, my voice miraculously steady. "I saved you some dinner if you're hungry." "Oh, you're a lifesaver," she sighed and gave me a brief hug. "I'm starving." I watched as she opened the refrigerator and found the leftovers I'd saved. My mind screamed at me with every casual move she made. "How can you act so normal?" I wanted to yell. "How can you stand there and pretend everything is fine?" But I bit my tongue. In that moment, I felt like I was observing a stranger inhabiting my wife's body. The woman in front of me looked like Jessica, sounded like Jessica, even had the same little habit of humming under her breath as she fixed a plate. But I knew the truth. I knew that somewhere under that normal facade was a woman who had betrayed me, who had been with another man likely just hours ago. We made small talk as she ate. Or rather, she made small talk and I nodded along, barely processing her words. She was telling me some anecdote about her day at work. I half listened as she spun what sounded like a plausible story of back-to-back meetings and a last-minute client call. A marvel, really, how effortlessly she lied to me. She must have been doing it for months. I gave vague responses, hoping they fit. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she'd hear it. But she was focused on her food, likely happy to have dodged suspicion once again. That night, lying in bed together, was the hardest night of my life up to that point. Jessica fell asleep quickly, her exhaustion perhaps genuine, or maybe just the result of a day of excitement with her lover. I lay beside her in the darkness, silent tears slipping from the corners of my eyes onto my pillow. I had my back turned to her and I was grateful she didn't stir. The anger inside me was like a living thing, coiled tight, begging for release. But right then, I could only endure. I stared at the wall, feeling the vast emotional chasm between the two of us in that bed, a chasm she had opened. As her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep, I promised myself two things. I would not let her deceit destroy me, and I would make sure that the consequences of her betrayal were fully realized by everyone involved. In the silent darkness of our bedroom, with the betrayer sleeping peacefully next to me, I began to lay the groundwork in my mind for the storm that was to come. Suffering in silence. Morning came, pale light spilling into the bedroom, and I was already awake to witness it. I hadn't truly slept. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Jessica. As I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection, I barely recognized the man in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot and ringed with shadows. I splashed cold water on my face and practiced a neutral expression, trying to mask the turmoil roiling inside. Today would be the first day I carried this secret knowledge while pretending everything was normal. The thought was daunting, but I knew I had to do it, at least until I figured out my next steps. By the time I went downstairs, I'd decided on a partial plan for the day. I would not go into the office. Calling in sick felt almost laughably appropriate. I was sick, just not in a way that a day of rest would cure. I quickly texted my manager that I had a sudden illness and would need the day off, something I'd rarely done in my career. After that, I set about making breakfast on autopilot. Scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, moving through the familiar routine as if it could anchor me. When Jessica came down, dressed smartly for work and hair still damp from her shower, I was at the stove. I felt her hand slide around my waist from behind in a morning hug. The gesture, once comforting, now made my skin crawl. My whole body tensed involuntarily. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft and a little sleepy. She let go and moved to pour herself coffee. I turned off the stove, eggs cooked just enough, and mustered a smile as I turned to face her. "Morning," I replied, sliding a plate toward her on the counter. My voice sounded normal, I think. She didn't seem to notice anything amiss as she thanked me and began to nibble on the toast. I forced myself to eat a few bites as well, though I tasted nothing. My stomach was churning with anxiety and anger held at bay. We chatted superficially about the kids' schedules and a reminder that Ethan had a dentist appointment the next week. I kept my answers short, afraid that if I said too much I'd slip. Every time Jessica looked at me with those familiar eyes, I wondered how I could have been blind to the change in her. Sitting across from her at our small kitchen table, I felt like I was facing a stranger masquerading as my wife. She mentioned she'd be a little late again, citing more work to finish up. I just nodded and said, "Sure, no problem," with what I hoped was a casual tone. Inside, my heart rate spiked. Late again because of him. The thought almost made me break the fork in my hand, but I steadied myself. As she gathered her purse and keys, I walked her to the door, a habit of ours. This time, I had to steel myself when she leaned in for a goodbye kiss. I pecked her lips lightly, not letting myself think about where those lips had been. "Have a good day," I murmured. She smiled. "You too. Hope you feel better," she said, gesturing to my mention of being sick. I had almost forgotten the lie I told for staying home. I just nodded. With a final wave, Jessica left, pulling the door shut behind her. Through the window, I watched her drive off, the car disappearing down the street. The moment she was out of sight, I let out a shuddering breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hands were shaking again, and I clenched them into fists to try to stop. I stood in the foyer of our quiet house, utterly alone with my thoughts. The mask of normalcy fell away and a grimace of pain crossed my face. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who actually cared about me, who could ground me. My first thought was of my best friend, Dave. We'd known each other since college, and he was the kind of friend who was like a brother. He and his wife had shared countless double dates and family get-togethers with us over the years. If there was anyone I could trust with this, it was him. I grabbed my phone and stepped out into the backyard, as if being outside would ensure privacy even though I was alone in the house. The morning air was crisp, a typical Southern California autumn day that promised heat by noon. I dialed Dave's number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Mike," Dave's upbeat voice came through. I tried to speak, but at first nothing came out. My throat was tight. "Mike? You there?" he asked, concern creeping into his tone at my silence. I swallowed hard, realizing I hadn't prepared what to say or how to say it. I need to talk," I managed, my voice raw. "It's Jessica. Can you meet me? Like now?" Something in my voice must have alarmed him because he didn't hesitate. "Of course, are you okay? Where do you want to meet?" I closed my eyes, a tear escaping down my cheek now that I didn't have to pretend to be strong. "Not really. I'll explain when I see you. Maybe the diner near your office?" Dave worked a few miles away, and I knew the diner was a quiet place where we could talk without interruption. "I'm heading there now," he said firmly. "Hang tight." 20 minutes later, I slid into a booth at the back of the nearly empty diner. The smell of bacon and coffee hung in the air, but I had no appetite. Dave arrived shortly after, still in his office attire, having likely invented an excuse to step out. His face was etched with worry as he took one look at me. I hadn't realized how disheveled I looked until I saw his expression. He didn't wait for me to start. "Mike, what happened? You're scaring me." My resolve crumbled. The second I tried to speak, a quiet sob hit me. I covered my face with my hand, ashamed to be breaking down in the middle of a public place. But I couldn't help it. In a hushed, halting voice, I told him everything. Finding the messages, the affair, how I had sat next to Jessica last night knowing she'd been with someone else. The words tumbled out, filled with hurt and anger and disbelief. Dave's eyes widened, then darkened with anger as he listened. He muttered a curse under his breath. "That's unbelievable. I'm so sorry, man." His hands balled into fist on the table. I could see he was furious on my behalf and also struggling to process that someone he considered a friend, Jessica, could do this. "I never had a clue," I whispered. "Not one. How stupid does that make me?" "Hey, don't," Dave said, shaking his head. "Don't do that to yourself. You trusted your wife. That's what you're supposed to do. It's on her for breaking that trust, not on you for believing in her." I nodded slightly, wiping my eyes. Hearing that helped, if only a little. We sat in silence for a minute. The waitress came by, and Dave quickly ordered 2 coffees, probably just to give us something to do with our hands. "So what are you going to do?" he asked quietly, after the waitress moved away. I stared at the scratched Formica tabletop. "I don't know. Part of me wants to rage, scream at her, kick her out of the house this second, but I have to think of Ethan and Olivia, and some vindictive part of me doesn't want to just confront her and let them slink away to their affair. I need them to face consequences." My voice hardened as I spoke the last sentence. Dave nodded, leaning forward. "I get it. They can't just do this and get away with it scot-free. But you've got to be smart. You mentioned you saved some evidence?" "Yeah," I said. "I forwarded all their texts and photos to myself. I even saw they planned to meet today, at lunch, at Pacific Palms Hotel. I almost spat out the name of the hotel. Dave raised his eyebrows at that. So you know where they'll be and when. Are you thinking of catching them there? His question hung in the air. I realized I did want to see it with my own eyes, as painful as that might be. And if I could catch them together, maybe photograph it, I'd have even more incontrovertible proof. Proof I could use in whatever came next, whether that was divorce proceedings or some sort of exposure of their affair. I said slowly, I think I need to. I want to see them together, to make it real to myself, and to have as much evidence as possible. I don't plan on confronting them there, though. Not yet. Dave looked at me carefully. All right. I don't like the idea of you going alone. You're hurt and angry. What if you lose it when you see them? I clenched my jaw. I won't. I can't afford to. If I go off, they'll just twist it against me somehow. I have to keep it together. For the kids, and for myself. He still looked uncertain. Mike, I hear you. But I also know you. You're my best friend. This kind of pain, it can make a man do something he'd regret. I'm coming with you. Relief and gratitude flooded me. You'd do that? He managed a slight smile. Of course. What are friends for? Besides, if that bastard's there, you might need someone to hold you back. I couldn't argue with that. We finished our coffees and made a plan. It was almost 11 a.m. Now, Jessica's messages had said she'd meet Ryan at noon. Pacific Palms wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute drive. We'd take separate cars. If by chance Jessica spotted my car, the whole thing would blow up. Dave offered to drive me in his car, and after some debate, I agreed. I didn't trust myself to stay calm if something unexpected happened, and an extra pair of eyes would be helpful. As we left the diner, Dave put a hand on my shoulder. We'll get through this, one step at a time. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I didn't trust myself to speak without crying or screaming, so I just gave his shoulder a squeeze in return. Inside, I was bracing myself for what we might see at the hotel. Whatever shred of hope I had that this affair wasn't as bad as it seemed was about to be shattered completely. But I needed it shattered. I needed the full truth, no matter how painful, to steel myself for what I had to do next. Laying the trap. We parked a discreet distance from the Pacific Palms Hotel just before noon. My heart was in my throat as we sat in Dave's car, watching and waiting. The hotel was a modest two-story building with a small parking lot partially visible from the side street where we hid. I wore a baseball cap low over my face, my nerves jangling with adrenaline and dread. Dave sat beside me, occasionally glancing in my direction as if to gauge my emotional state. My hands were clammy, camera app open on my phone, ready to snap pictures. At 12:07 p.m., I saw her car. Jessica's blue sedan pulled into the lot. I stiffened and felt Dave put a calming hand on my shoulder. She parked and stepped out, looking around briefly. Even from a distance, I recognized the blouse she was wearing. It was one of my favorites, a soft cream color I'd bought her last Christmas. The betrayal twisted deeper. She was wearing it for him. A few moments later, another car entered the lot. A black SUV I didn't recognize. It parked 2 spaces away from Jessica. A man emerged. Tall, athletic build, with sandy brown hair. That must be Ryan. I'd only seen a glimpse of his face in a tiny profile picture in the texts, but now I saw him clearly. He was maybe in his mid-30s, dressed casually in a polo and slacks, looking every bit the confident office charmer. Even without knowing him, I felt a visceral hate coil in my stomach. That man had strolled into my life and stolen the trust of my wife, and he did it with a smile. I raised my phone and started snapping pictures as inconspicuously as possible through the car window. My hands shook, but I managed to get them in frame. Jessica walked up to him with a little glance around, checking if anyone was watching. She didn't see us tucked away down the side street. Satisfied they were unobserved, she smiled at him, and he pulled her into an embrace. Even at this distance, I could see how familiar it was. She rested her head on his shoulder for a moment. Then, to my agony, they kissed. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. My vision literally blurred at the edges, and I nearly flung the car door open to charge at them. Mike, no, Dave hissed, gripping my arm tightly. I hadn't even realized I'd started to move. I stopped, heart hammering, and forced myself back into the seat. Instead, I pressed the shutter button on my phone, capturing the moment of their lips together, her arms around his neck. A perfect, horrible betrayal immortalized in pixels. They broke the kiss and hurried inside the hotel, hand in hand. As the door shut behind them, I finally exhaled the breath I'd been holding. I sank back against the seat, my entire body trembling with a mixture of fury, hurt, and a sick sort of relief. Relief because now I knew beyond any doubt. Seeing it with my own eyes destroyed the last kernel of hope that this might not be real. It was painfully real. Beside me, Dave was cursing under his breath, looking as angry as I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly after a moment. I swallowed, finding my throat dry. I I needed to," I replied, voice raw. I had needed it, as masochistic as that sounded. If I was going to do what needed to be done, I couldn't cling to any illusions. We waited. Each minute that passed was torture, picturing what was happening behind those closed doors. Every so often, I caught myself clenching my fists or grinding my teeth. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was just over 40 minutes later when Jessica and Ryan emerged. I tensed up all over again. They looked flushed, hair a bit messy. My stomach churned, knowing exactly why. Jessica was laughing at something he said as they walked to their cars. The sight of her so carefree and happy, happier than I'd seen her act with me in a long time, tore at my heart. I snapped more photos, them exiting together, her hand briefly brushing his arm in a playful way, the two of them parting with one last quick kiss before they got into their separate cars. I captured it all. Evidence. With every click, I told myself I was one step closer to justice, to making them pay for this pain. As soon as her car left, heading presumably back to work, I let out a roar of anguish inside the car. I couldn't hold it in anymore. It was a guttural, animal sound that scared even me. But it was better let out in front of Dave than in front of them. I punched the passenger seat back repeatedly, my knuckles reddening with each hit, until Dave grabbed my arm. Mike! "Enough," he said firmly. "I know it hurts, but save it. You're going to need a clear head." I slumped back, breathing hard. He was right. I had to keep it together. The storm inside me was raging, but I needed to channel it, not let it loose blindly. I nodded, rubbing my face. "I'm okay," I lied unconvincingly. We sat there in silence for a few minutes. I stared at the hotel, a place that would be seared in my mind forever as the site of my wife's ultimate betrayal. But I also thought of the evidence I now had, the photos, the texts, everything. It felt cruel and cold to gather these things, but they were my weapons, and I intended to use them. "What's the next step?" Dave finally asked as he started the car. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. "I need to talk to a lawyer," I said. "Even if I don't plan on a messy fight, I should know my rights. And get papers ready." Saying it out loud hurt, but there was resolve in my voice. If Jessica wanted out of our marriage enough to do this, then I'd make that decision easy for her. I would not stay married to a cheater. Dave agreed. "Yeah, better to be prepared. I have a friend who went through a divorce last year. He said his attorney was decent. I'll text you her contact." "Thanks," I replied. "Also, I'm thinking of how to expose this. I don't want to just quietly divorce and let them carry on. They should face consequences at work, with our friends, everywhere." Dave nodded, a grim smile on his lips. "They earned whatever's coming. You have any ideas?" I looked out the window as we drove, watching the world go on as normal outside. People walking dogs, a cyclist, two women chatting outside a cafe, all oblivious to the personal war I was planning. Ideas swirled in my mind, some dark and vengeful, some more measured. I think I want to expose them in front of their colleagues. That's where they carried on their affair mostly, right under everyone's noses. If I just inform HR quietly, maybe they get a slap on the wrist or they keep it hush. But if I reveal it publicly, that'll really hit their reputations. Dave whistled low. "Public, huh? You thinking like crashing her work or something?" "Maybe," I said. "I need to find the right moment. Ideally when a lot of her coworkers and superiors are present. Actually, I remembered something. Jessica had mentioned in passing about an upcoming celebration once their project launched. When we were on the patio that night before all this, she'd said something about how after the product went live, her team was going to have a party, and that I should come. At the time, it was just casual chatter, but Now it came back to me crystal clear. She has a project launch party coming up, possibly next week or so, I continued. She invited me. It's supposed to be a family-friendly thing, like a dinner at a nice restaurant for the team and spouses. If I recall, her boss will be there, maybe even some higher-ups. I could see Dave catch on, his eyes widening. Oh man, that would be a hell of a place to drop the bomb. I nodded, a cold smile forming for the first time in days. Exactly. I show up, play the doting husband, and then, at the right time, I present what I know. Let everyone see their true faces. A mixture of excitement and anxiety fluttered in my chest as I envisioned it. It would be dramatic and devastating for them. Jessica's carefully curated image of a successful professional and loving wife would implode. Ryan, standing with his colleagues, some of whom might not even know he's sleeping with a coworker, would be shattered, and in front of their superiors, no less. There'd be no hiding or downplaying the affair once it was out in the open like that. You've got everything you need to back it up? Dave asked practically. You might want to have physical copies or something. People might not believe just accusations. I'll be ready, I said. I've got the screenshots, the photos from today. I can print some out or even maybe put them on a thumb drive. He raised an eyebrow. How are you going to show it, though? Like stand up and give a speech? Play a slideshow of her greatest hits? Despite everything, a short laugh escaped me, an ugly, bitter laugh. A speech, maybe. I doubt they'd let me near their AV equipment to run a slideshow. But I can speak, and if needed, I'll have printouts in an envelope to pass around or hand to her boss. The thought of physically handing her boss a picture of Jessica kissing Ryan made my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But it would certainly drive the point home. Jesus, Dave muttered. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I just shook my head. I never wanted any of this. I have to do it. My voice was heavy. Dave gave me a sympathetic look and drove me back to my car. When I got back home, my anger and curiosity drove me to dig deeper into who this Ryan really was. Using the clues I had, his full name from Jessica's messages and the company information, I searched online. It wasn't hard to find his profile on a social network. What I discovered somehow made me even angrier. Ryan was married. In his profile picture, he stood with his arm around a pretty brunette woman, both of them smiling at what looked like a family gathering. A quick scroll through confirmed she was his wife, and there were photos of a little boy too, probably their son. Realizing that this affair wasn't just a betrayal of me and our kids, but also of this other innocent woman and child, made my blood boil. Another family was about to be collateral damage to this sordid fling. I felt a pang of sympathy for Ryan's wife. She had no idea what humiliation was looming over her life thanks to her husband's actions. I saved her name and a screenshot of their profile, mind already turning on whether and when I should tell her what I knew. She deserved to know the truth, just as I did. But I had to be careful. If I approached her too soon, it could tip off Jessica and Ryan. So I resolved to hold on to that information until the right moment. What it did do was steel my resolve even further. This wasn't just about revenge or anger anymore. It felt like exposing them was a necessary justice, not only for me, but for everyone they were deceiving. That afternoon, after parting ways with Dave, I called the divorce attorney he recommended. I managed to get a consultation for the next day. Those hours until the appointment were surreal, interacting with my coworkers via email about mundane tasks, picking up Olivia from her friend's house, reminding Ethan to do his homework, all while knowing my life was in the middle of imploding. I felt like I was on autopilot. When Jessica came home that evening, I played my part again. I asked her about her day. She gave the same rehearsed lines about meetings and progress on her project. I must have sounded convincingly interested because she mentioned, in an excited tone, that her team's launch party had been scheduled for the following Friday night at a high-end restaurant downtown, and she really wanted me to be there. She was so enthusiastic about it, you'd think she was just a proud wife, eager to show off her husband, instead of a cheater scheming under his nose. I smiled and told her of course I'd be there to support her. The irony that I was attending in order to destroy her facade wasn't lost on me. Over the next several days, I continued to move through life as normally as possible on the surface. But underneath, I was preparing for war. The meeting with the lawyer went smoothly. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who, after hearing my story and seeing some of the evidence, assured me that if needed, we could file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and that I was taking the right steps gathering proof. California is a no-fault divorce state, as she reminded me, but having evidence might help in negotiating things like custody or simply give me peace of mind. We discussed our kids and how I wanted to protect them from a nasty court fight. The lawyer suggested that if Jessica was agreeable, an uncontested divorce where we reach a settlement privately would spare the children drama and likely be best for everyone. I agreed. Despite my fury, I didn't want Ethan and Olivia to suffer more than they had to. Before parting, I asked the lawyer to draft divorce papers, but to hold off on filing until I gave the word. I wanted to present them to Jessica myself when the time was right, preferably right after the big reveal, so she'd know I was utterly serious. The lawyer understood and gave me some advice on protecting finances in the meantime. I quietly moved half of our joint savings into an account in my name alone, just in case, and updated the passwords on my personal accounts. I also made copies of important documents, bank statements, the mortgage, the kids' birth certificates, ready if I needed them. It was heartbreaking to prepare for the end of my marriage in such a clinical way, but with each document I copied, each plan I laid, I felt that steadfast resolve grow. I was taking control, and that gave me strength. Setting the stage. Finally, the night of the launch party arrived. I dressed in a suit I usually saved for special occasions, the same suit I had worn to company holiday parties and anniversaries. Tonight, however, I felt as though I was donning armor for battle. In my jacket pocket, I placed a slim envelope containing a few select printed photos and copies of the most damning text messages. I'd thought about bringing the tablet itself to scroll through messages if needed, but decided physical evidence would be more efficient and less likely to be snatched away. I also had my phone, loaded with the digital originals. Everything was ready. "You look handsome," Jessica said to me that evening, as we prepared to leave for the restaurant. She adjusted my tie with a loving smile, a picture of proud affection. I thanked her and complimented her dress, a knee-length navy blue dress I'd always loved on her. It struck me that we looked from the outside like a happy couple excited for a night out. She even took a selfie of us before leaving, her smiling brightly while I managed a convincing grin behind the turmoil. She posted it to her social media with a heart caption. The gall of it made me want to smash her phone, but I kept my cool. Soon enough, the facade would come crashing down. As we drove to the party, Jessica chatted about the people who would be there, gossip from work about who might get promoted next, little jokes to which I hummed in response. My mind was elsewhere, focused on staying calm and executing the plan. I could feel my pulse quicken with each mile closer to the restaurant. This was it. Months of betrayal had led to this night, and I was about to turn the tables dramatically. I rested my hand on the pocket with the evidence, reassuring myself it was still there and imagining the moment to come. For the first time in a long time, I felt a grim anticipation. Justice was near. The showdown. The restaurant was an upscale place with a private dining room reserved for the launch party. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over linen-covered tables. About 30 people were gathered. Roughly half were Jessica's co-workers from the project team, the rest spouses or dates. I walked in by Jessica's side, playing the role of proud husband. My heart was pounding so fiercely I was sure someone would notice, but outwardly I tried to appear calm and congenial. Jessica was immediately swept up in greeting her colleagues, introducing me to a few I hadn't met before. I smiled and shook hands, even as my chest tightened every time I saw Ryan across the room. He was there, of course, looking a bit uneasy when our eyes briefly met. Did he sense something in my gaze? I gave nothing away, just a polite nod. To my surprise, I saw that he had a woman with him, sitting at his side at one of the tables. She looked to be about our age, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, as she chatted with another spouse. My stomach clenched when I realized who she must be, Ryan's wife. From the pictures I'd seen online, I recognized her as Sarah. She looked utterly unsuspecting, happily oblivious to the betrayal happening in her own life. A surge of guilt twisted in me momentarily. I hated that she was about to be hurt by this, an innocent collateral damage. But she deserved the truth as much as I did. Part of me hoped that by ripping off the Band-Aid publicly, I'd at least ensure she learned the truth definitively, rather than living in ignorance. Dinner was a blur. I barely tasted the gourmet meal in front of me. I exchanged pleasantries with people at our table, Even cracked a joke or two that made Jessica squeeze my hand under the table affectionately. The audacity of her affection, her completely normal demeanor, made me almost nauseous. Across from us sat Ryan and his wife. At one point, Jessica and Ryan even made brief eye contact. Subtle, but I caught it. A flicker of something passing between them. Were they nervous or just cautious? I couldn't tell, but it took all my willpower not to glare daggers at them. After the main course, Jessica's boss, a genial older man named Victor, stood up to give a short speech, congratulating the team on the successful product launch. He praised several people by name, including Jessica and Ryan, for their hard work. People clapped, and I joined in, maintaining the facade. Victor then invited anyone else to speak if they had something to add. Jessica's colleagues made a few toasts. One joked about the long nights and how spouses deserved credit for putting up with them. I saw a few people glance at me, raising their glasses in light-hearted acknowledgement, thinking I was one of those supportive spouses. I forced a good-natured smile if only they knew. My moment had come. Before the opportunity slipped away, I rose from my chair, still holding my wine glass. "I'd like to say a few words, if I may," I announced. The table grew quiet, and so did nearby ones as heads turned toward me. Jessica looked up at me with an affectionate, somewhat surprised smile. She wasn't expecting me to make a speech, but she didn't seem alarmed. Why would she suspect anything? I was the loving husband about to sing her praises, or so she thought. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of the envelope in my jacket like a hot coal. "I just want to express how proud I am of my wife," I began, managing to keep my voice steady. I placed a hand on Jessica's shoulder. She gazed up at me, her eyes shining with happiness and pride. The sight almost made me falter. Almost. Jessica has worked so hard on this project, and seeing everyone here celebrating is really wonderful. People around the room nodded and smiled. I continued, "As a husband, it's not always easy. You know, the late nights, the stress. Sometimes you feel a bit left out." A few spouses chuckled knowingly. Jessica rubbed my hand on her shoulder in a small gesture of apology. If only she knew what was coming. My heart was thudding against my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe and pressed on. "But," I said, and my tone caused a hush to fall because something in it had changed. I took my hand off her shoulder. "But I realized tonight that I wasn't as alone during those late nights as I thought. Jessica may have had someone very special keeping her company." A frown creased Jessica's brow. "Michael, what are you—" she began, but I gently motioned for her to let me finish, my eyes never leaving the glass in my hand. I swirled the wine gently. "I want to give a toast," I said, my voice growing stronger, colder. "A toast to honesty and to the colleagues who really go above and beyond for each other." My gaze lifted and landed directly on Ryan. He was staring at me, face gone pale. The room's atmosphere shifted. Confusion, tension. You could hear a pin drop. My lips curved in a facsimile of a smile. In fact, one might say my wife and Ryan have been exceptionally close these past months. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ryan's wife, Sarah, looked at me, then at her husband, not comprehending yet but sensing something was very wrong. Jessica had gone stiff as a board at my side. "Michael," she said in a low, strained voice, her eyes wide, pleading. She knew. Maybe it was the mention of Ryan, or the tone of my voice, but she knew something bad was coming. I felt a surge of vindication and sorrow all at once, but I kept my composure. I pulled the envelope from my jacket. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," I said to the audience at large, "but recent events have really shown me what true teamwork looks like." I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but I projected my voice clearly. "To Ryan and Jessica for putting in those extra hours together. At hotels, in cars, wherever they could." There was a collective gasp. A woman at another table put a hand to her mouth. Ryan shot up from his seat, nearly knocking over his chair. "Now, hold on," he blurted, face red, trying for a controlling tone that cracked. I talked over him, years of frustration and hurt edging into my voice. "What's the matter, Ryan?" I asked, staring him down. "You don't want me to share how close you and my wife have gotten?" "I think your wife might be interested to know." I looked at Sarah directly. Her face was draining of color as she looked between her husband and Jessica and me, horror slowly dawning in her eyes. "Mike, stop it," Jessica hissed, standing up and grabbing my arm. Her face was flushed, her eyes already tearing up. She tried to smile desperately at the others. He's just joking. He's had too much to drink. I yanked my arm away and set my glass down with deliberate calm. I'm completely sober, and this is no joke. My voice cut through her pretense. I stepped slightly away from her so I could address the whole room clearly. For the past 3 months, my wife and Ryan have been having an affair. There, plain and direct. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Shocked cries and whispers erupted. Sarah let out a stunned, pained, "What?" as she stared at her husband. Victor, Jessica's boss, rose from his seat, hands up. "All right, let's all just—" I didn't let him silence me. "I have proof," I announced, holding up the envelope. My hand was shaking now, anger seeping into my facade, despite my efforts. In here are photos and copies of text messages between them. Explicit messages. Meetings at the Pacific Palms Hotel during lunch breaks. I glanced at Jessica, whose face had gone white as she realized exactly what I had. "Recognize that name, Jessica? You should. You were there yesterday at noon." Jessica burst into tears, covering her mouth with her hand. The room was chaos. Half the people still in shock, a few starting to mutter angrily. Ryan moved toward me as if to grab the envelope. "You bastard!" he snarled under his breath, panic in his eyes. "Give me that. Touch me, and I will put you on the floor," I warned in a low voice that vibrated with barely controlled fury. Dave wasn't here to hold me back anymore, and part of me almost welcomed him to try something. But he stopped, not willing to escalate to a physical altercation in front of his colleagues and bosses. I handed the envelope to Victor, the boss, who looked utterly shell-shocked. "Go on," I said, voice thick with emotion yet loud enough for the room. "You can read them if you like. Or maybe just show one of those photos to Mrs. L." I nodded towards Sarah, whose eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at the envelope in Victor's hands. Then at her husband in utter betrayal. "No, no, no!" Sarah stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. Ryan tried to reach for her, but she recoiled from him like he was poisonous. "Don't you touch me!" she screamed, voice cracking. The entire table jumped. Murmurs and gasps grew louder. Some people stood up, unsure whether to intervene or comfort. The restaurant staff hovered at the periphery, alarmed by the commotion but not sure what to do. Jessica was sobbing openly now, clinging to my arm. "Michael, please, please stop," she begged through tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her facade had crumbled entirely. Gone was the confident, vibrant woman of the office. She was now just a broken figure, makeup streaked with tears, gripping me with trembling hands. I gently removed her hands from my arm, feeling strangely calm and distant in that moment. I had imagined yelling, screaming at her, but here and now, I found myself eerily composed. "I can't, Jess," I said quietly, but loud enough that those nearest would still hear. "It's too late for sorry. Did you think I would never find out? That you could betray me and our children and just get away with it?" She shook her head frantically, trying to speak through sobs, but I didn't want to hear it. I turned to address the room one last time. "I apologize for disrupting the evening, everyone." A bitter smile twisted my lips. "But you see, some things needed to be brought to light." I looked at Victor, whose expression was a mix of pity and discomfort. "Victor, I'm sorry your celebration was ruined. But I thought you should know what's been going on under your nose on your team." My eyes flicked to Ryan, who stood rigid, fists clenched, a glaze of desperation and anger in his eyes. Then to Jessica, who looked utterly devastated, covering her face in shame. "I think I'm done here," I said, voice trembling slightly now, as the adrenaline high started to ebb. No one moved to stop me as I stepped away from the table. Sarah was weeping, being gently guided out by another woman. I realized it was one of Ryan and Jessica's co-workers, her friend perhaps, supporting her. Ryan went after his wife, stammering apologies, but she spun and slapped him hard across the face. The crack of it echoed, freezing him in place. "Don't come home," I heard her hiss, voice thick with pain, before she turned and stormed out of the room with the other woman following. The eyes of every co-worker were on Ryan then, some in disbelief, others in disgust. His humiliation was total. Jessica reached for me once more as I began to walk away. "Michael," she cried, "where are you going? Please, let's talk about this, not here. Please." She looked around at the staring faces, her disgrace public and raw. I paused and looked back at her, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. This was the woman I had loved for so long, now a stranger to me. There's nothing left to talk about, Jess, I said, tired and defeated. Not here. Not anymore. I glanced at her left hand, where the wedding band I'd placed on her finger years ago still gleamed. We'll discuss the logistics later, but as far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over. My voice broke slightly on that last word, and tears pricked my eyes. I swallowed hard, refusing to break down in front of everyone. With that, I turned and walked out of the stunned, silent room. I didn't look back. As I pushed open the doors, I heard Jessica wail, a heartbreaking sound that might have moved me if I hadn't been so heartbroken myself. But I steeled myself and left her there, standing in the wreckage of our life, fully exposed for what she had done. Outside the restaurant, the cool night air hit my face, intensifying the adrenaline come down that made my hands shake. I fumbled for my phone and with trembling fingers texted Dave, "It's done. Can you pick me up?" He had agreed to be on standby tonight, and thank God he was. A minute later, his car pulled up to the curb. I slid into the passenger seat, my composure finally cracking. My friend looked at me, taking in my red-rimmed eyes and the way I was clutching my shaking hands together. Without a word, Dave reached over and pulled me into a quick, firm hug. That did it. I broke. I sobbed into my best friend's shoulder, all the pain and anger and sadness releasing at last. He just patted my back, letting me pour it out. After a few moments, I managed to get a hold of myself, wiping my face on my sleeves. "It's over," I whispered, voice raw. "I know," Dave said softly. He started driving, taking me away from the scene of devastation I had just created. I leaned my head back against the seat, exhaustion washing over me. It was over. I had done what I set out to do. Jessica and Ryan's reputations were in tatters, their lies laid bare. There was no going back now for any of us. Consequences and closure. In the aftermath of that explosive night, the pieces of our lives fell where they may. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, Dave insisted I stay at his house that night. Thankfully, we had arranged for my parents to watch Ethan and Olivia for the evening, under the pretense of us having a late night out, so the children were spared from the immediate fallout. I crashed on Dave's couch, staring blankly at the ceiling until exhaustion finally overtook me in the early morning hours. When I finally returned to my house the next day, the atmosphere felt different, hollow and heavy. Jessica wasn't there. I later learned she had gone to her parents' home after the incident, too ashamed and upset to face me or even step into our house. I was relieved. I needed time to collect myself and figure out how to handle what came next, especially regarding our kids. That afternoon, I picked up Ethan and Olivia from my parents. Plastering on a brave face for them was one of the hardest things I've ever done. They could tell something was wrong. Children are perceptive. Ethan, in particular, asked why Mom hadn't come home and why my eyes were red. I gently told them that Mom and Dad had a serious argument, and we needed a little time apart to sort grown-up things out. It hurt to see them worry, but I reassured them again and again that we both loved them very much, and that none of this was their fault. A day later, when I was calmer, I agreed to meet with Jessica in private to talk. We chose to do it at the house when the kids were at school and daycare, ensuring they wouldn't overhear the difficult conversation. I will never forget the sight of her walking through the door that morning. She looked like a shadow of herself. Her eyes were swollen and bloodshot, her face pale, and she moved as if she was carrying a great weight. In a way, she was. The moment she saw me, fresh tears welled up in her eyes. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling, I don't even know where to start. I am so sorry." Her voice cracked. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve for you to hear me out, but please, if there's any part of you that ever loved me, please let me say this." I didn't respond, but I didn't stop her from continuing. I felt cold, drained of all emotion in that moment. Maybe it was a defense mechanism, but it was the only way I could handle hearing her. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she spoke haltingly. She apologized over and over, saying that she never meant to hurt me, that what she'd done was the biggest mistake of her life. She said she'd been feeling lost and insecure in herself, that as she approached her mid-30s, she panicked about life becoming dull, that the attention from Ryan made her feel desirable and alive in a way she foolishly craved. "It was never about you not being good enough," she insisted, sobbing. "It was about my own issues. my own selfishness and stupidity. She confessed that when it started, she told herself it was just a fling, something separate from our life that I would never need to know about. She actually convinced herself no one would get hurt if it stayed secret. But it did mean something, apparently, a kind of escapism that she now deeply regretted. She was practically on her knees begging by the time she finished pouring her heart out. I will do anything, anything to fix this, to make it up to you, she pleaded. Please, Michael. If there's even a tiny chance, I'll fight for it. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job, whatever it takes. Just please don't throw away everything we have without giving me a chance to atone. As I listened, I felt an overwhelming sadness, not anger, that had burned itself out in the fire of the previous night, but a deep sorrow that the woman I heard speaking now was someone I no longer knew. Her words were desperate and sincere, but they felt like too little, too late. The time for honesty and effort was before she took those fateful steps, not after everything lay in ruins. I shook my head slowly. Jessica, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, I'm not throwing away what we had. You did that when you decided to betray me. She opened her mouth, but I continued, keeping my tone as gentle as I could manage. I loved you with everything I had. I would have done anything for you, for our family, and you knew that. You knew it, and still you chose him. You chose lies. My voice wavered despite my effort to remain composed. Maybe you are sorry. I believe you probably are, but I can't undo what's been done. I can't unhear those things you said about me to him, or unsee what I saw. I can't be the man who is clueless while his wife laughs behind his back. I can't ever trust you again. And without trust, we have nothing. She broke down in fresh sobs, rocking slightly on the floor where she had sunk. I felt tears in my own eyes, but I blinked them back. Is there really no chance, she whispered, after 15 years? No chance to start over. I had to look away, up at the ceiling where sunlight played in a corner, to steel myself. In my heart, I knew the answer, but saying it was still painful. No, I said, barely more than a breath, then more firmly. No, I'm sorry, but I can't be with you anymore. I want a divorce. She nodded through her tears, as if she had expected nothing else, but still couldn't bear to hear it. For a long moment, we just existed in silence, her sobbing quietly, me standing a few feet away, tears of my own finally escaping down my face. It was as if the enormity of the loss finally hit us both fully. 15 years, 2 children, a house full of memories, gone, or at least irrevocably altered because of her actions. Eventually, I knelt down in front of her. I didn't embrace her, those days were over, but I looked her in the eyes. We need to do what's right for the kids now, I said softly. We have to handle this in a way that hurts them the least. That means no ugly court fights, no dragging this out. We settle things fairly and quickly. We stay civil for them. Jessica wiped her nose and nodded, sniffing. Of course, she croaked. I don't want to hurt them. I'll do whatever you think is best. I reached into a folder I had set on the coffee table nearby and pulled out a set of papers. Divorce papers my lawyer had prepared and dated for filing. I had them ready, expecting this outcome. Her eyes widened at the sight of them and a fresh tremor went through her, but she didn't protest. I had these drafted, I said. We can go through them together, or with our lawyers, but the gist is joint custody. The kids need both of us, so I won't ever keep them from you as long as you're good to them. My voice faltered a bit. Good to them. She had always been a good mother in their eyes, and I wanted that to remain true if possible. We'll split everything else fairly. I'm not out to punish you with money or anything. I just want this done quietly. I paused. We can say it was mutual, irreconcilable differences. We don't have to tell the kids or anyone more than that. Most people close to us already knew the real story after the spectacle I'd made, but at least officially and to the kids, we could keep it simpler. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Thank you for not trying to take them away from me. I don't deserve kindness from you, but thank you. I didn't reply to that. In truth, a part of me wanted to lash out and make her hurt as much as I did. But a larger part just wanted peace. For me and for our children. Inflicting more damage wouldn't change what happened or make any of us heal faster. We discussed a few practical details. She said she'd stay at her parents' for a while and not come back to the house until I was comfortable. except to get her things when I was out. We agreed to slowly and gently break the news to the kids together in a week or so. We'd tell them mom and dad were separating and would live in different homes, but we both loved them, and they'd still see both of us often. It was the hardest conversation we knew we'd ever have, but we were determined to make it as loving as possible for their sake. True to her word, Jessica didn't contest anything. Within a few weeks, we had signed the divorce agreement and filed it. No court battles, no public mudslinging, just two broken people quietly dividing a life. She even insisted on giving me the house. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps she felt it'd be better for the kids to keep their home base. She moved into an apartment not far away to make shared custody easier, and we set up a schedule that we both stuck to without fail. To my surprise, she also handed me a letter one day during the process, an apology addressed to my parents and to our children for failing as a wife and mother. I never showed the kids that letter, they were too young to bear that weight, but I did share it with my folks. It was a gesture that, in its own way, showed me she truly regretted her actions, but some things you can't undo. As for the fallout beyond our family, it was significant. News of the dramatic revelation at the restaurant spread through Jessica's company like wildfire. By Monday, everyone in her office knew what had happened. The embarrassment was too much for her to continue working there. She opted to quit her job within the week. Ryan didn't last much longer either. He was asked to resign after HR caught wind of how he'd conducted himself. I suspect the company wanted to quietly clean up the scandal. Victor, the boss, felt personally betrayed by both of them for carrying on an affair under his watch, and especially for the scene that ruined the team celebration. Socially, there were heavy consequences too. Friends we had known for years were stunned. Once word got out why we were divorcing, most people sided with me. Some of our mutual friends cut ties with Jessica entirely, unable to reconcile the cheerful, friendly woman they knew with the one who cheated on her husband and lied to everyone. Her own parents were devastated. I had a difficult phone call with her father, who was normally a stoic man. He cried as he apologized to me on her behalf, telling me he understood my decision and that I'd always be family to them even if she had failed me. I actually found myself comforting him, telling him his daughter would need his support now because I wouldn't be there to support her anymore. It was a surreal reversal of roles. And what of the unfaithful lovers? They did not get a happy ending. From what I heard, in the immediate aftermath, Jessica and Ryan did not continue their relationship. Perhaps without the thrill of sneaking around, and under the harsh light of judgment, whatever they thought they had fizzled. Ryan's wife, true to what she said in the restaurant, filed for divorce almost immediately. I can't blame her. The last I heard, she moved back to her hometown to be near her family, taking their son with her. Ryan was left effectively alone. No family, no job, and a tarnished reputation. Jessica, too, found herself isolated, living in a small apartment, unemployed for a time, and facing the shame of her actions. If they spoke to each other after everything, it was likely only to share regret for what they had done. The irony wasn't lost on me. They destroyed two marriages and in the end, had nothing to show for it except each other's mutual bitterness. In the months that followed, I focused on healing and on being the best father I could be. The first few weeks were especially hard. I would wake up in the middle of the night expecting her to be next to me, only to remember in a cold rush that I was alone. There were days I was irritable or distant, and I hated that the kids saw me like that. But with time, the wounds began to scab over. I started seeing a therapist who helped me work through the betrayal and my anger in a healthier way. Dave and a few other close friends checked in on me regularly, making sure I never isolated myself too much. My parents and siblings were rocks of support, helping with the kids on days when I felt overwhelmed and just needed a break to clear my head. Little by little, I built a new routine, one without Jessica. To my surprise, I found that underneath all the pain, there was a sense of relief as well. Relief that I was no longer living in ignorance, no longer being lied to daily. The truth, as harsh as it was, set me free from a false life, and I took pride in the fact that I handled it on my own terms. I stood up for myself in a way that ensured the betrayal did not stay in the shadows. I reclaimed my dignity that night in the restaurant, and I have no regrets about that. The children have adjusted as well as I could have hoped. They know mom and dad aren't together, and while Olivia is young enough to accept it with only mild confusion, Ethan took it harder, being old enough to sense the deeper turmoil. I never badmouthed Jessica to them. And I won't. She is their mother. And despite it all, I want them to have a loving relationship with her. She, to her credit, has been devoted to them and civil with me in all our interactions about their needs. In some ways, we communicate better now about the kids than we did in our last year of marriage, perhaps because everything is out in the open and there's nothing left to hide or fight about except what truly matters. We share birthdays and holidays without tension, at least on the surface, and the kids feel comfortable going back and forth between us. It isn't the family life I ever wanted, but it is the reality we have, and we're making it work for them. Not long ago, I found myself at the beach with Ethan and Olivia on a clear, sunny afternoon. They were building a sandcastle by the water's edge, and I stood watching them as the waves rolled in gently. I realized I felt at peace. The sting of betrayal had dulled with time. In its place was a cautious optimism. I had my children who adore me and whom I would move heaven and earth for, and I had a solid foundation under my feet that I built myself after having my world shattered. Jessica and I are no longer husband and wife, but we are co-parents, and we remain civil. She's working on putting her life back together, and so am I, on my own terms. As I watch the California sun start to dip toward the horizon, coloring the sky in hues of orange and gold, I thought back to that serene morning when I believed I was the luckiest man alive. Life can change in an instant. Storms can arrive without warning under the clearest of skies. But standing there with my arms wrapped around my kids as we admired the sunset, I felt something like closure. We had weathered the storm. I had walked through hell and made it out the other side with my head held high and my dignity intact. The cost was heavy, but I paid it and kept what mattered most. In the end, our family is different, smaller in a sense, but it's still a family bound by love. My children are healthy and happy, and they know their dad is here for them, unbroken and strong. As for me, I'm learning to trust and laugh again. Each day, the pain recedes a little more. The scars remain, but they remind me of what I survived and what I won't ever settle for again. The sun finally slipped into the Pacific, and I held Ethan and Olivia close as the sky turned twilight blue. This was not the life I had envisioned a year ago, but it was ours, and it was honest and real, and for that I was grateful.